Hey guys, welcome to WASD20. My name is Nate, and you are here for the very first episode of D&D Short Swords. These are short swords because I hope that they will be short, sharp, and pointed little bits of inspiration, tips, and all kinds of stuff, and I'm not going to try to edit them, even though I just had a speaker go off. There we go, we're just going to turn that right down. This is partially inspired by my good friend Tim over at Tabletop Terrors, who's been doing a series called You Need a Thing. Check them out, they're very short, inspirational little videos. And I've really been enjoying them. Barker also has his 5-minute frenzy, and those are formative in me thinking about how to do these. So, short little videos with RPG inspiration for DMs and players alike, hopefully. The first few actually, I'm going to be doing a series on conflict in tabletop role-playing games. Sources of conflict. Every good role-playing game, you need some kind of conflict, right? It's part of a good story. In this one, I want to talk about this fairly non-traditional conflict, a source of tension or, I guess, a problem to overcome, and that is that of disease, sickness, or plague. Now, I'm not just talking about, oh no, so-and-so's sick, right? That could be. But what I'm talking about here is maybe more widespread sickness, plague, disease, and the sorts of interesting things you can do with that as a source of conflict. Now, sources of conflict probably come in layers, and so you might have the source of conflict being a evil overlord that's trying to take over the world, and we can talk about that source of conflict later because that's another important one. It's an archetype that's, I think, very effective. Keeping an eye on my time here, I don't want to go too long. But in this one, I want to mainly just focus on disease, sickness, and plague, and I'll give you a couple examples. So I was reading a book to my son a couple years ago. I think it was called Rowan of Rin as a series. They're pretty good books for kids, kind of fantasy. Every book is like, man, this is like a D&D game right here. But in those books, there was one that started with the animal that they rely on, the buckshaw, being very sick and many of them dying. And how was that a source of conflict for them? Well, their livelihood relied on these animals, and so they had to figure out what's going on and what are we going to do about it. They had to get to the source of it. All right, another one was in a session I ran for my boys actually a while back, about a month ago, a session of Hero Kids. We play that. It's a role-playing game for kids. It's a lot of fun. And the whole quest that they went on in this particular session was this village. All these people had been getting sick and they didn't know why, and people were just very lethargic and many of them bedridden, and it was really just obviously hurting the town. Some people were dying even, and they had to figure out what's going on. And so they found some clue that led them to a dungeon, and eventually in the dungeon they fought some monsters and did some very traditional things that my boys just love. And then at the end they got to this kind of brewing, stewing pond of just poison that they noticed after they defeated this big giant snake that had made its home in there. They noticed that it was flowing out into the river that was flowing to this village, right? And that was their source of drinking water, etc. So they had to be creative and try to solve that problem, and I won't get into all that. But how can that be applied to your game? Well, maybe you have a sort of individual mission like that, a quest, a session that is based around sickness, or maybe that's the focus of your entire campaign. And let's brainstorm for a minute about some of the possible causes of this plague or disease or sickness, right? I think you can go a lot of directions with this. It could be an ancient curse. It could be some kind of ancient prophecy that is now being brought to fruition. And that can be something that the players have to figure out. And I think it could also be a practical cause, something more, I don't know, scientific. Maybe that seems like less fun, but it could be something that's just very practical. Something like the plague during the Middle Ages, the bubonic plague, right, the Black Death. These sorts of things have practical causes. They didn't know them at the time, so there were all sorts of superstitions, but it could be a practical cause. It could just be, hey, there's poison getting in our river, right? Or it could be, as I mentioned at the beginning, it could be a person. It could be a creature that is causing this, a dragon. The presence of some new creatures, an evil race, or something like that. So there's all sorts of things you can do with that in your tabletop role-playing game. Now, as a player, sickness could be a part of your individual story too. Perhaps it's something that you have. Think of lycanthropy, right? That can be a really interesting dynamic for a player sometimes if a player gets that. But you can take it on a smaller scale too, and you can kind of work with your DM to figure out some interesting kind of character flaw there, a certain sickness that you have that maybe only rears its ugly head once in a while. Or perhaps it's part of your character's history. This character lost his parents in a plague, right? And maybe now it's coming back, and so this is personal. So anyway, that's the very first episode of D&D Short Swords. Again, just kind of short, sharp, and pointed, hopefully, inspiration, tips, etc. for your tabletop role-playing game. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have you ever used sickness to great effect in a campaign or in a session? And yeah, what other thoughts do you have? Always love to hear from you. Everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.